We're going to talk a little bit about the diaphragm clutch. There's a lot of diaphragm clutches on the market, and the best way to really put it is a lot of people ask a lot of questions through forums and social media and different things along that line, really asking what the best clutch is for them. And most of the time what I see sitting back really watching it is that people are recommending something based off of not necessarily what they've had success with, what their performance has been, anything like that. They're suggesting it kind of based off of, hey, it's what I've got, it works for me, if it works for me, it should work for you. And you really need to know what makes a clutch better than another one. Why does it fit my combination? What can be changed? Diaphragm clutches are a little bit somewhat of a marketing snake oil in today's industry. There's a lot of them that are very good, great quality products, well built, use the right materials to get what they need to do. At the same time, there's a lot of others that are basically a copycat doing the same thing, which is common with our industry, of course, we all know. That all being said, I'm going to compare this information to what you guys are usually probably most seeing Tinsy or myself post and give information as far as feedback and advice on tuning and application data towards clutch design, development, and tuning. You're used to probably seeing a lot of our information regarding more types of adjustable clutches, whether it be our next gen, the long style, or a pro billet style clutch. However, that being said, what the diaphragm clutch is it's basically a stagnant type of adjustment. There's very few adjustments you can really make to them on the fly. A diaphragm clutch specifically we'll look at, to start off with, say a stamped steel style cover. Those are usually going to be somewhere between, say, 2,800 pounds to 3,200 pounds of static diaphragm pressure that is applied at all times, which is kind of like an on-off switch. So when you take your foot off the pedal, it's immediate. You're going to get 2,800 pounds of pressure applied to the friction material immediately. Every clutch is very simply basically broken down into the fact that it is two-part equation. It is applied pressure over friction coefficient. So to make that make sense, the more friction coefficient you have, the less applied pressure you would need to do the same thing. And vice versa. The way to look at this properly is that in a diaphragm clutch, there's a few things you can do to increase, decrease the pressure. There's a few things you can do to increase, decrease the friction coefficient. The applied pressure, of course, can be changed by shims, but only to a certain amount. If you take too much pressure off the diaphragm, it doesn't work correctly. If you take enough shim out, which means run the diaphragm lower in the cover, more initial static load pressure, it's going to hit even more, harshly. So a lot of times we'll get someone asking us, for a high horsepower application for a street strip, they want to know, can we build a clutch that'll save the transmission, save the rear end, save the axle, save everything behind the clutch? The truth of the matter is, if we do that, the clutch isn't going to survive, because basically it's going to be slipping all the time. And if it's slipping all the time, of course, we're just going to have more worn out parts more quickly. But that being taken into account, we have to look at the different materials and the different things we use to make a diaphragm style clutch as good as we can make it. A diaphragm clutch, the components that you need to look at are really just a few small things. Yes, there are a lot of standard stamped steel diaphragms on the market that are just X amount of diaphragm pressure, and there are you'll see some steel and aluminum. I'm not saying somebody out there probably hasn't done something a little more exotic, but the most common of steel and aluminum style cut cover, you're probably used to seeing something like the Power Force or the Ram unit, things along those lines. They're very well built covers, and they're a little bit better, but the ones that do not have a centrifugal lever assist to them are a static amount of pressure all the time, and all they can be done is shimmed up and down to reduce or increase pressure. The properties that you need to look at are, the place I'll start is going to be the flywheel and the pressure plate. What are they made out of? It's very common, the old adage, and there's a lot of people out there when we do clutch and tuning seminars, that this is a very common topic that we go through in the class, is a lot of people will say, hey, I've only got a really slow amount of horsepower. I got 400, 500 horsepower in a 3,500 pound car or more. And they'll want to put a really heavy steel flywheel in it because they feel like that moment of inertia is really going to help them on the takeoff. The truth of the matter is, if you look at data, and we've looked at a lot of it, we've got years of experience with this, it's really not the right way to go. The right way to go is to get your gear ratios and your suspension right. You know, you need to change the bite of the car, you need to put more ratio in it. Whatever you need to do to gain that wheel speed is important, because you will only see that little bit of extra inertia in the drive shaft RPM for usually less than 0.05 of a second on a graph, which basically means it usually pulls back down past that point, so it's almost kind of null and void after that. It's a catch-22 in that when you pack an extra heavy clutch assembly, you actually end up doing something in every gear change. It now has to lug the motor back up, you know, through it every single time. So it's really kind of, you know, it's a catch-22. It doesn't really help you at all. That being said, the aluminum is the way to go. Aluminum is the best material as far as heat dissipation that we can currently use readily for a clutch material that's not something exotic. That's not overpriced where it doesn't make sense to our customers. The aluminum helps dissipate the heat, of course, and so to look at a pressure ring, most pressure rings as far as a diaphragm clutch you will find on the market are going to be made of ductile iron. There are a few that will be of billet steel. Billet steel is definitely a major improvement over ductile iron. However, it also has the same inherent problem. What we do with our stuff is we do use an aluminum pressure ring that we, in certain clutches we have designed and developed this for, but we do make an aluminum pressure ring for some of our units where we go ahead and we put a segmented pressure ring together where it has segmented heat shields on it. The segmented heat shields allow for the heat of it to expand and contract as the clutch gets hot and cold. That's one of the biggest enemies to a modern day clutch, or any clutch I should say, is really one of the last things that we have to overcome is heat cycles. As the clutch gets hot and cold, that is the worst thing to it almost more than anything else. You'll see this pressure ring here was actually designed for some of our Coyote stock guys and some of the others in this relatively same classes. But what it's made to do is have a segmented heat shield on it. So there's 4 segments that are bolted on. We do not use rivets on something like this. If any of you guys are watching and you're used to the rivet-on style steel heat shield patterns of the McLeod stuff, the old Ram stuff, the old Hayes, it's great for those clutches and the entry-level stuff. It's something that was done for years. This is really just an improvement that we found that works a lot better. The rivets that hold those on are usually brass, and the brass is it's 3 metals is the problem with it, and it's not necessarily a problem with a long style that's going to see repeated rebuilds. We're going to be into those 75 to 100 runs, let's say, so we don't see the problem with the cupping and the warping. However, most people who are running a diaphragm are not going to refresh or rebuild that frequently. They need a little bit more longevity out of it, and especially when we're seeing street use, and especially high horsepower street use. So what it allows for this to do is this heat shield can actually can expand and contract with the heat cycles, which allows everything to wear even over the entire course of its lifetime. Most people are probably used to pulling out a clutch after some time and seeing that the clutch disc is not wearing across the complete surface. Of course, this doesn't only reduce its capacity of what it can hold, but it also majorly changes its consistency factor, because it's not going to do the same thing every time, especially if it gets on less and less area. So this is one way that we can make improvements. The next thing is to look at, once again, is the steel flywheel or the aluminum flywheel. The aluminum flywheel with heat shields is a better way to go. Of course, segmenting the heat shields is by far the best. The topic that's maybe not brought up as often as maybe it should be is make sure as best as you can that your disc inside diameter and outside diameter match that of your heat shields, which basically means, let's say this is a 6-inch diameter on the inside between heat shield to heat shield and it's 10-inch on the outside, your disc needs to be the same as well. Because if you run an inside diameter that's a larger one, which would basically bring it out further out to the outside, that's going to cause a problem in the fact that it's actually going to cause premature warping. It's going to make the material build to the outsides of the pressure ring as the centrifugal source of it basically throws it to the outside. So basically, to come back to it, you have to look at why do we choose one style of a diaphragm clutch over another. What is right for you? There's a lot of things to be taken into account in a diaphragm clutch just as much as there is as a long style or a pro billet. And basically, to break that down, we're going to look at the chassis to begin with. How much bite is the chassis at? That means how much weight can it distribute or transfer to the back or to the applied pressure area, so that that's going to directly determine how much gear ratio you can get away with. That's going to then directly correlate to how much load is put on the clutch. So a lot of times, if you feel like you're over clutched, sometimes you need to find a way. You may be over geared also, which means by reducing your gear ratio, you're going to be able to apply more clutch pressure, and vice versa. So there's a lot of things to look at when you're looking at this. So a lot of the guys that are running a diaphragm style clutch are going to be running what I want to call a street or synchronized or maybe a face-plated style transmission. You're the guys that are running a T56, a Magnum, a TKO, or something along those lines more than likely. You don't have as many options out there for gear ratio changes as, say, something along the Liberty, Lenco, G-Force type of an application. So there's a little bit more to take into account there. We have to look at how well the tire bites in, all that. So when we choose a clutch for you, we're going to choose how much clutch load is usually appropriate based off of the rest of your combination. So when someone asks me, hey, I've got a 700 horsepower Shelby Cobra or a Copo Camaro or something along those lines, it does matter. Is it boosted? Is it naturally aspirated? What gear ratios are in it? How heavy is it? What size tire are we going to run on it? All that makes a difference in choosing the right clutch for you. It's basically to say a one-size-fits-all does not make sense. I will never advertise clutches based off of horsepower and tell you that it's going to hold 2,000 horsepower or 100 horsepower or anything in between, simply because it is a major factor on the rest of the combination. It has to be custom chosen for you in order for it to be proper. We try to educate the best we can, as I feel that that's the best way to have customer satisfaction. And the more information that's out there, the more stick racers we're going to get, the more people that are releasing the man pedal, so to speak, which I can't say much simply because my other half, of course, well, obviously is Tinsy. But it's professional side of things. It's people want to know why do stick cars always have a bigger weight penalty on them? And it's really simple. It has to do with horsepower and RPM and things along those lines, because we're going to be staying in an operative area of our RPM band that is more able to be utilized at higher horsepower for a longer period of time, and it's more efficient. The trick with the factor is that you guys are usually used to using a term that I would like to call, that you guys call, I guess, driver mod. And some people bring up what something that gives me a little bit of the heebie-jeebies is the clutch shamer. Basically, in my opinion, I understand the purpose of a release solenoid on a clutch pedal. We did something years and years ago, probably 20 years ago now. There was a pneumatic, and we've done pneumatic hydraulic style of release that controls it more, a little bit better than the Lowe's Special. But at the same time, it's a little bit more expensive, and it's somewhat of something that's been written out of most rules simply because it has to be released off the driver's foot, it needs to be tuned, etc., etc. But because you guys are using a diaphragm clutch that is an immediate direct application of pressure, that is not something that comes in over an RPM band, and to touch on that briefly, you're probably used to people talking about the term slipper clutch. Not my favorite term. I like to prefer adjustable, but it does fit. Basically what that means is you're slipping it at a low RPM. What that means is we are able, by applying counterweight pressure to the levers, to leave at one pressure and have more pressure come in over the course of additional RPM. So if we were to look at a hypothetical application of launching at 5,000 RPM and then locking it up around 7,000, shifting it at 78, let's say, that allows us to leave at 5,000 with one pressure and lock up at 7,000. We know from clutch dyno information, we can tell exactly how much pressure it takes after run. So if we see it locked up at 6,800 instead, we know exactly how much pressure the clutch applied at 68, and we can make a little bit of math changes to make it at 7 or 72 or wherever we want to go. So you guys don't have that necessarily, so that's part of why some of the more fancy diaphragm style clutches have been made, and what you're used to is something along the lines of the Power Force or similar clutches which have a lever assist. The only drawback to them is what we can accomplish with it currently with that technology. It's the latest and the greatest. It's the most advanced to what's available, which does allow for levers around the outside edge to apply additional pressure on top of the pressure ring for RPM. However, when we do this, we will decrease the amount of diaphragm pressure that you're going to see, because that's very important, because we're going to apply the rest of it through that counterweight. So we also will up the friction coefficient. And so, for an example, from a standard, say, single disc or twin disc diaphragm clutch that you'd be used to looking at, that would be a stamped steel. We're going to look at one that is, let's say those apply about 3,000 pounds of pressure. With this clutch, we're going to drop it down to somewhere in the neighborhood of about 1,800, and we can actually change the shims. We have different diaphragms that allow us to go all the way from 1,100 pounds up to around 1,900, a little bit more, just by a little bit of shim difference and a couple different diaphragm options. But the basic street model is going to put the 1,800 pound diaphragm in there, and at about 7,000 RPM, you're going to be able to see anywhere between 300 to 380 pounds of additional plate load pressure, which is rather minimal as compared to a long style type clutch. A long style clutch would almost flip-flop those numbers. So you would, on an adjustable clutch, you would leave more around the line of 500 to 600 pounds of static pressure, and the rest of it to get up there would be coming from counterweight. I always use this example when I'm talking to customers or explaining this, and this is really showing apples to onions is the only best way to put it. This is a real bad comparison, but it really exemplifies exactly what it is. Our own Mountain Motor Pro Stock style stuff, a twin disc clutch, a twin 10-inch, takes approximately 6,000 pounds of pressure to lock up around 7 to 7,200 RPM. In so doing, only about 1,000 pounds of that comes from this static base pressure that we put into it. The rest of the other 5,000 pounds is going to come through centrifugal weight. So that's how we're able to slip the clutch or control when it locks up. This also is something that is different over a diaphragm, because when you shift, that centrifugal force is decreased exponentially because it drops in RPM. So every time it drops in RPM, it actually loses counterweight, which loses pressure. The diaphragm's not going to do that unless it is a counterweighted diaphragm clutch like what we do, but even then it's not, it still has a lot left as far as going to a full tunable application. So being able to slip the clutch off the starting line and to get those 60 foots that you guys are looking for, there is sometimes an advantage over a low-end style diaphragm clutch that does not have any counterweight to it. However, some of our best customers, and I'll give them a shout out, would be, Drew Lyons, Darren Hendricks, some of you guys that are Coyote stock guys. They're doing about the best you can with 60 foot without, any modification, quote unquote driver mod, is because we actually are using the best technology we can based off of a diaphragm clutch. Problem is, of course, some of the sanctioned organizations, of course, have left you guys in the Stone Age, and I apologize for that, is we really would love to see you guys, and a lot of you would love to be able to get to an adjustable clutch so you can go quicker, faster, and not have to work, pull the transmission out to work on it. But for you street guys, the best way to kind of look at why you choose what you choose, if you're going to put it in there, you're going to want a lot of street miles out of it, you got a lot of horsepower, or you're beating up on it at the track, but you need the longevity, you have to take into account what parts you're putting into it. Once again, the aluminum parts are the best as far as to be able to dissipate the heat. Heat is the absolute #1 enemy of any clutch. The next thing to look at is I'll touch base on this briefly, as we're going to do another segment that's going to be based off of different clutch disc materials. The basic street clutches, as everybody knows, the #1 thing that you're going to get at O'Reilly's, Advanced Auto, whoever you're going to go down the street and get, or just calling Jegs and Summit and getting something off the shelf, it's going to be an organic style material. Some people go to what they call like a dual friction or organic blend, something along those lines. Organic is really simply an organic material that has a metal fiber within it, and it's made for longevity and the very easy street use. That's what's not going to chatter. It's going to have a really smooth engagement. That's what you're used to getting in a Mazda Miata or Honda Civic or a Mustang or a Camaro straight from the factory, and that's what you're going to get. So does it have ultimate clamp or holding pressure? No, it does not. However, it's not really made for actual maximum performance. Instead, a lot of times people choose to go to more exotic materials. Some of the more exotic materials are things like Kevlar, carbon, ceramic, things along those lines. However, I will advise to my drag race community, which we do, a lot of course, we're used to doing everything from road race to land speed, standing mile, to, of course, drag race is our specialty. But that being said, those materials are usually a little bit less predictable throughout their times of wear. They're a little bit more grabby, a little bit more of an on-off switch. They're they tend to not be very forgiving. They're also a little bit more harsh as far as shifts and engagements. So the next material that you'll find that's very prominent, it's a little bit more expensive to manufacture. But it wears very, very good. It's very consistent, is a cerametallic. A cerametallic in our world, our vernacular, we refer to it as bronze. Of course, just mainly because of the color of it. The materials that are in a cerametallic are, there's a lot of stuff that goes in. Different people have different ways of making those compounds. If you buy one from each different disc manufacturer, people who do that powdered metal, the recipe is always going to be a little bit different. But that's what we use friction dynos and information like that to basically know what kind of load we need to apply in order to have the friction coefficient right. Cerametallic is what's most commonly used in some of the higher end stuff. What we use with the Power Force things along those lines. It's very good for high horsepower applications. We've got a lot of our guys pushing 1,000 to 1,200 horsepower in Shelby style Mustangs and the Copo Camaros that are making, they're big power full body cars, road racing them with twin discs in them, and they live in a 10-inch. Don't get me wrong, you can kill anything, but at the same time, it's about making something that's rebuildable, that has the longevity in it, and it's going to do what you need it to do. At the end of the day, it's all about the parts and the components with the diaphragm clutch. It's important to remember a lot of the clutch companies out there are basically just doing something to copy what somebody else has, and there's not necessarily anything wrong with that, especially if you can get customer service. Customer service in this field in this industry is probably something that has become second to none. You don't want to go to O'Reilly's and order a clutch for your high horsepower street car, drag car, road race car, or anything else, simply because you know that the person behind the counter would rather sell you blinker fluid. So that being said, it's important to get that information. We do the best we can to work with our customers and explain everything. Sometimes it may not be the answer that you want, but the one thing I will tell you in the clutch world to look at is rebuildability is very important, but it's the old adage of buy once and cry once. It's better to put something in there that you're not going to have to work on all the time, and it's going to hold what you need it to do.